Before we go into the first arc, I would like to note that the makers of the show must have been taking notes on what the fans wanted more of, and what they wanted less of. It's great to know that there are some shows out there that listen to their fans and take into account what they want to see. Since there were large gaps from time to time between episodes in the series, the writers must be using that time to take into account what the fans are saying. But let's move on to the opening arc, Orion Pax. After Optimus loses his memories as a Prime and thinks that he is still Orion Pax, Megatron twists his mind, making him believe that the Autobots laid waste to Cybertron. At the same time, he uses Orion to decode special data he retrieved from the Vault of Iacon during the war, which Orion starts, finding locations of special weapons and relics of the Primes. Meanwhile, the Autobots know a way to get Optimus's memories back, with the key to Vector Sigma, which Optimus gave to Jack before confronting Unicron. It shows how much Optimus respects Jack and knows that he is the best choice to save him. Also, we see how brave RC is in the series by charging into the Decepticon ground bridge to save Orion. Wait, why didn't the Autobots try this before? They can handle the Decepticons well enough, so why don't they follow the Decepticons to the Nemesis more often? Well, why don't the Decepticons follow the Autobots to their base? That's another thing that Starscream has over Megatron. He attempted to do that! And speaking of Starscream, he makes his legendary return in the premiere, and actually is possibly the reason Optimus ended up regaining his memories. I started to wonder at that point if Starscream was some kind of chosen one. I remember in a comic Starscream was one of the few chosen by the Matrix of Leadership. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
You truly are being kept in the dark, aren't you?
Starscream starts to make Orion doubt that any of what Megatron told him was true, and later helps out the Autobots by telling them where the new Decepticon space bridge is. Then they use the space bridge to transport RC and Jack to Cybertron to find Vector Sigma. They find it at the Decepticon capital Kaon, which is guarded by a new species of Decepticon, an Insecticon. We'll get to them in a bit. Jack finds Vector Sigma and downloads Optimus's memories to the key. Meanwhile, Orion betrays Megatron, finally figuring out his intentions, and even confronting him. Then when RC and Jack return, he was restored to himself.
No! Megatron? Be gone.
Falcon Punch!
The second season is much different than the first, I must add. It's even better, but it's structured differently. The first season had no recurring theme, unless you counted the Dark Energon. It had a multitude of stories that still managed to flow together well. The second season does have a recurring theme, though. The Autobots and the Decepticons are searching for ancient Cybertronian relics from the Vaults of Iacon, which could be anything from a destructive superweapon that instantly kills Transformers, or a magic artifact of the Primes. But sometimes there is focus on other things, like Mech having a bigger role than it did in the first season, and Starscream teams up with him after they steal Bumblebee's T-Cog, an organ that allows Cybertronians to transform. But Starscream ends up betrayed by them. We also meet Dreadwing, the brother of Skyquake, voiced by the Fallen. I'm not even joking. He's voiced by the Fallen.
Every last Autobot on this accursed world will pay. Only a Prime can defeat me. And now, only one remains.
The Arachnid leaves the Decepticons after she kills Breakdown, and Mech succeeds in making their own Transformer, Nemesis Prime. One thing I should talk about is a 6-part arc that happened in the second season, mostly because Starscream fangirls will want me to go over the 6 Starscreams. In this arc, Starscream clones himself to take down Megatron, but at the same time Bulkhead accidentally got onto the Nemesis. It gets even more complicated when Arachnid unleashes an army of Insecticons, which are giant insect-like Decepticons that start out as a threat, but after a while they become like beefed-up Viacons. RC finds Arachnid and defeats her by trapping her in a stasis pod, and the Insecticons beg Megatron for forgiveness before Bulkhead makes the Nemesis crash. Megatron later restores the warship by using Dark Energon, but the Nemesis becomes alive, and turns on its crew before the humans sneak on the ship and empty the core of Dark Energon. But the Nemesis has decoded 4 sets of coordinates of relics from the Icon database, having the Autobots and Decepticons scatter to those locations. This is one of the more complicated story arcs. There are many different locations, and each has a different set of characters to focus on, which does work out well. And the gathering of the relics isn't one-sided. Each side does get one. The Autobots get the phase shifter, which can have them phase through solid objects. Starscream gets the Apex armor, which is an indestructible armor that gives him the strength of the Hulk. The Decepticons get the Resonance Blaster, a sonic weapon, and no one gets the Poisonous Energon, the Toxin. But still, it ended with one of the biggest cliffhangers ever. There was this awesome Insecticon villain named Hardshell that is after the Toxin, and he fights Bulkhead over it. He even almost kills Bulkhead, which led to a 3-month wait for the next episode. I mentioned before that the animation budget wasn't as big as the Clone Wars, so the show usually took extended breaks to get more episodes made. But this was just ridiculous! I'm sorry, but leaving us off at a point where a great character might have been killed off is just cruel. Then 3 months later, he's just in a coma. Everything's fine, and he's just gonna be crippled for 4 episodes until Deadpool comes in and they establish his character. Okay, I'm ranting too much, but you can understand why. When it came to character deaths in the series, it was mostly one-sided. It's not like I wanted a lot of characters to die, I didn't. But they often had moments in which a character was going to die, but then they have a cop-out, so the character gets to live. I wouldn't mind at all if it wasn't so biased. They gave the Autobots an easy time, and they killed Decepticons more often. In fact, let's count the amount of Autobot deaths we had, and the amount of Autobot fake-out deaths we had.
Any more questions?
Optimus, no!
Five Autobot deaths total. 2 of them were flashbacks, 2 of them were resurrected almost immediately, so technically we only had 3. 1 if you don't count the flashbacks. Now let's count every fake out. Hey, that technically counts! See, that's 5 times how many deaths for Autobots there have been. Now to Decepticons and how much they have died. Not including the drones, and it doesn't include non-Decepticons like Unicron, Nemesis Prime, and Silas.
Oh no. Megatron!
7 deaths total for the Decepticons. Excluding drones, some of them were resurrected characters that just die again. You can really see that they really favored the Autobots they had, and they didn't want to replace them with fan favorites. Fans kept asking for Ironhide or Jazz to come in, but it never really happened. Hell, we didn't even get to see the awesome Grimlock, and the Dinobots were teased. Back to the show. After Bulkhead is injured, Wheeljack and Miko go to take revenge on Hardshell, killing him off way faster than we had to wait to see if Bulkhead was going to die. And afterwards, a new Autobot who became a fan favorite, Smokescreen, appears, and you can see why we like him so much. Nolan North.
Woo! Too hot for you, cons? I shot him in the ass. It's one of these.
He becomes a really important character too, most likely because the creators knew that he'd be a fan favorite. So they gave him a big role, but still, no part in the opening intro! Bulkhead at first is depressed that he might be replaced by Deadpool, but later respects him when he saves him from Silas and breaks down the body. Then later, the Icon Relics storyline is wrapped up when they find the Star Saber, a giant sword that is like a Transformer's lightsaber. Then the build to the season finale begins as they start hunting down the last relics, the Omega Keys, which can restore Cybertron. The hunt begins as the Autobots, Decepticons, and Starscream are all after the keys. Megatron ends up replacing his arm with a Prime arm, which I still think might belong to the Fallen who was mentioned.
Yeah, right. And I've been lobbing with the Fallen.
It lets him use the Forge of Phyllis Prime to create the Dark Star Saber. To conclude this key hunt, Smokescreen is revealed to have the final Omega Key. He is captured by Soundwave, but escapes the Nemesis with 2 Omega Keys. Then Starscream comes in and steals all the Omega Keys, making me believe once again that he is some kind of chosen one. Then he's able to rejoin the Decepticons because of this, and this is probably their best way to kill off Dreadwing and make Starscream second in command again.
I said stand down!
I'm okay. I'm okay! Lord Megatron, you have my eternal thanks.
Then the epic battle for Cybertron takes place over the Omega Keys, and the Decepticons capture the humans and threaten to kill them if they don't give the Omega Keys to them. So naturally, the Autobots surrender, but this leads to the Decepticons showing exactly why it's so important, why the Autobots need to be the ones to restore Cybertron.
What difference does it make who restores Cybertron?
In all likelihood, the leader of the Decepticons will portray himself as our planet's savior and brand all Autobots as war criminals.
But they add even more reason to that when the Decepticons try to cyberform Earth into another metal planet, so this leaves Optimus with no choice but to destroy the Omega Lock. I feel this really shows how much of a hero Optimus Prime is. He really values the life of others over his own. So not only is he willing to endanger the Autobot cause for his friends, but also doom his own world to save ours. It really says something about his heroism. And not only did he save Earth, but he also saved the Autobots as well. Then when they return to Earth, they find that Megatron has built a giant Cybertronian fortress in the Nevada desert, Darkmount. The Autobots have to escape the base when the Decepticons fight with Agent Fowler and Wheeljack outside. This leads to the single most darkest ending to a season for any Transformers episode.
This is the place, all right.
This was the place.
United we stand, divided they fall.
This was a really dark finale, and an epic one too. The Decepticons win, the Autobots are scattered, and Optimus Prime is possibly dead at this point. This was an even bigger cliffhanger ending to the season than the first one's ending. Then the third and final season came along. But I feel like I'm forgetting something. This is a Transformers review, so I feel it needs a certain someone in it.
Hello.
Hey Mischief, I dare you to review The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Why?
You wanted Keanu Reeves' worst movie, so there you go. Thanks for the cameo.
That wasn't much of a cameo. Never mind, I'll get him later in his next cameo.
Now that I've got that out of the way, let's talk about the third season, Beast Hunters.